Pennsylvania, an average of 23%. This year, North Carolina, an average of 20%. New York, somewhere between 5 and 18%, they're not sure. Everybody's health care is going up. We were supposed to pay less. We're paying more. We were supposed to pay $2,500 or $3,500 a year less. The average person is paying $4,500 a year less. And by the way, Mr. Tonko voted for that health care plan, but that's not the one he chose. He chose the federal health care plan, which costs about $1,400 a month. But you and I subsidize that for $1,000 a month. He pays $400 of it. And who's subsidizing my health care plan? That's what I want to know. Why is it that the taxpayers are always subsidizing Washington? When he uses the code talk, invest, that means take that tax dollars out of your pocket and give it to the federal government, the fat bureaucrats, or some agency that is sucking money away, including these big giant green companies that all went under after sucking away the bailout money.
Thank you, Mr. Vitollo. Now, the next question is from Matt, and Mr. Vitollo will answer first.
On trade, there's been much discussion about the effectiveness of NAFTA, but looking forward about a trans-Pacific partnership and whether that's a correct place to move, and how we should move forward with that. First of all, do you support a TPP, and based on what we know about how that has progressed in negotiations, the way that is progressing, do you support that? And also, if you do not support the TPP, I mean, what direction do you think this country should move on or in terms of trade?
Well, it's one of the areas where I agree with Mr. Tonko, and that is I am 100% opposed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, although we disagree on different levels. My conditioning on the problem with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, it's too burdensome on American companies. American companies, American trade, we pay a larger portion than the other countries in the involvement of the agreement. So I oppose a lot of these trade agreements, including NAFTA. They have not benefited America. They have injured America. And I think we need to, once again, go back to a standard tariff system like we had at the founding of this country, and stay away from this massive amount of federal involvement when it comes to international trade. For instance, we seem to get involved in, like recently the federal government themselves purchased a big giant chunk of cheese from a foreign country because they wanted to help that country out. It was a really nice thing for them to do. You know what the problem was? And this is the problem with all these crazy little trade things that they do. Farmers right here in the state of New York have to dump hundreds of pounds of milk on the ground because the places where they used to sell their surplus milk to won't buy it to make cheese because there's a requirement that you have to buy federal surplus first. And so we are cutting the throats of the American farmers, the American manufacturers, American industry by entering into these agreements that are so overburdensome on us, and entering into the government trying to offset things for other governments. The government needs to stay out of that kind of business.
Thank you, Mr. Vitollo. Mr. Tonko.
Sure, thank you, Mary. The effort here, Steve, I think is to look at the big picture and see where we've been with our trade agreements. And if they're anti-labor, if they're anti-environment, and a number of other standards that we pride ourselves on having as a nation, then we can't be placed on that unlevel playing field. And with the TPP, with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we're talking about an agreement with 12 nations that comprise 40% of the world's GDP. That's a huge impact. This one can't be done incorrectly. And I think the fact that, if we provide a situation where there's a benefit to workers in Vietnam, making 50 to 60 cents an hour, we're going to dumb down the workforce around the country, around the world. So it's more than just an impact on us as a nation. And so I stand for trade, but trade that works for all of us in this nation and where we have effective opportunity to be competitive. It can't be an unlevel playing field. The standards, I think, need to be addressed in very open context. But what I really worry about is that oftentimes the implementation of these agreements is not there. Even if you can get some stable or sound agreement, which TPP is not, it still lies in the hands of implementing. And there's courts. The ISDS court allows for corporate people. For instance, if you didn't want some label on a cigarette package, you as a corporation can go to this court established by the agreement that enables them to have a heavy emphasis on maybe undoing some regulations in this country that we've imposed. Now, that's an awesome benefit offered the corporate sector. So I think we need to be real about this. There is we can't be isolationists, obviously. We need to trade. We're 4.7% of the world population, but we're a huge economy that everyone around the world would like to trade with. So we should use that strength for opportunities for trade that is different than these agreements that lock us in long-term.
Thank you,
into
Mr.
unfair
Tonko.
situations.
The next question will be asked by Karen and will be answered first by Mr. Tonko.
Gun control, where do you stand? Should the gun show loophole be closed? Should people on the terrorist no-fly list be banned from buying weapons?
Thank you, Karen. The real concern today to national and international security is terrorism that can loom large. We need to make certain that those who are on a no-fly list cannot buy. To me, it makes sense. Since 2004, 2,500 people have been able to legally purchase a weapon, and they've been on that no-fly list. That is very telling to me. So we need to close that loophole. There is certainly background checks required for ordinary gun purchases. But if you do it online or if you do it at a gun show, that requirement isn't there. So I think that it has to be a background check situation, making certain that no one has a gun that ought not have that gun because of the concern for safety or terrorism associated with that purchase. I think that certainly, those in a territory like ours where they practice, target practice, or hunt, obviously, I'm not looking to take your gun. I just I want some of those standards to be great. And I've talked to neighbors, relatives, friends who are gun owners who target practice or hunt, and they say, background checks, bring them on. I'm a responsible citizen, what should I worry about? And it's when the forces, the undue influence of the NRA on legislators, we had to do a sit-in this year to bring attention to the issue. And finally, people got it. They said, look, here's what's holding it up. It's not like we're all like NRA friendly in the House, that there were those who wanted progressive policy, and there were those that were the resistance to that policy. And the sit-in, thanks to the periscopes that we had with modern technology, after the cameras were shut off in the House, we still were able to broadcast to this country. And people, I never received such a response like I did with the sit-in, so that people had a better definition to the issue and who was where on the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. Mr. Vitollo.
We have a lot of gun laws in this country. And if we enforce those gun laws, then everything will be okay. The problem is we don't enforce the gun laws we have. So if we enforce those gun laws, there wouldn't be a problem. We don't need, again, more legislation. And honestly, the sit-in was an embarrassment for American government. But the whole idea of gun control is very, very divisive. And there are countries where they have no guns, and then there's countries where every single household has a gun. And so we can say, oh, well, those countries that have no guns are better off. Well, that's not true, because some of these countries that every household has a gun, they're doing all right too. So we can take a look at a lot of different things, but the bottom line is the Second Amendment guarantees our right to bear arms. And I am not in favor of legislation like Mrs. Clinton is in favor of, that we register our hunting rifles. Sorry, I don't think that the federal government needs to know where every rifle is. It's none of their business. I am not a terrorist. I am not an anarchist. I am not a rebel. But what I am is a citizen of the United States, and until we decide to overturn the Constitution and overturn the Bill of Rights, then I'm going to hold on to my guns, and even then, I'm still going to hold on to my guns.
Thank you. The next question is from Steve and will be answered by Mr. Vitollo.
Many Americans believe that there is an illegal immigration crisis in our country, yet Congress has been unable to agree on comprehensive immigration reform legislation. What would you like to see in an immigration reform package, and specifically, how would you deal with the large numbers of illegal immigrants residing in the U.S.?
That's a good question. There is a terrible immigration problem in this country, and we need to fix it. It needs to be addressed, but I don't believe that amnesty is the answer. We've tried that 3 times already, and all it did was bring a larger flood of illegal immigrants in. We need to tighten up our borders. We need to strengthen our security border guards, north and south. I personally tried this myself. There are 3 areas in the state of New York where you can walk across into Canada, and no one's even going to say anything to you. And so what's that going to do to stop a terrorist from walking the opposite direction? We need to do something about our borders. We need to secure our borders, because I don't believe that America is safe from terrorism, and that Congress is not doing their job. The immigration issue, we have an incredible number of illegal immigrants. Honestly, some people will take issue with this. They need to go back and come back the right way. I don't believe that these illegal immigrants should be able to stay here. I have people who live on my block who came in the right way only about 9 years ago, and they are so offended by even the thought of giving it away. These people worked hard to become citizens of the United States. They're proud to be citizens of the United States, and those who come in and disgrace the United States, especially criminal offenders, they should be put out and never be allowed to come back again. But instead, they've been brought back, some of them 2 and 3 times, have killed people in California, have killed people in Texas, have killed and raped people in Florida. Listen, we need to get our borders under control. We need to do something with this immigration problem. There does need to be comprehensive reform, but the reform does not involve amnesty.
Thank you. Mr. Tonko.
Yes, thank you. Before I answer that immigration thing, I just want to make a point that I'm surprised that where there are loopholes that enable people who have proven themselves unworthy of owning a gun would be not a concern to my opponent. I think that we need to see that for what it is. With the immigration issue, we're a nation of immigrants. I'm a grandson of immigrants, proud of that label. Work with immigrants who, just the other day, went to a celebration of a gentleman 73 years old who came here at the age of 21, excuse me. By the age of 23, started a business, and it's been very successful. He's hiring hundreds of people. That's the American dream. We don't deny that simply by a carte blanche rejection of immigrants that should have a sound pathway to citizenship. This is what I think is essential. Now, the United States Senate, in a bipartisan fashion, put together a bill that was deemed balanced and constitutional. And we have failed to address that bill. The House has refused to take action on legislation that would offer people the soundness of a pathway to citizenship. Talk to the medical community. And I do all the time, to the engineering community, to the farming community. They would be hurt by some of these extreme measures because they require immigrant populations to address their personnel needs. So I think that has to be borne in mind. And you know, when I think of us as New York, and the harbor of New York, and the Statue of Liberty, and the torch held high, and the statement that we are that home to those who have struggled, maybe escaping tyranny, maybe refugees, who are, by the way, vetted by a very defined, deliberate, and tough process. And we have a role to play there, because if these people are left in a zone where they're tortured and maltreated, it's a perfect storm for terrorists, for ISIS to come to them and recruit them for their numbers.
Thank you.
We have to see the big picture here.
Thank you. The next question is from Matt and will be answered by Mr. Tonko.
The 20th district has the capital region's largest municipalities within its borders, and an issue that is predominantly played out inside of our urban areas is the strained relations between minority communities and law enforcement. I'm curious, is this an area where you see that a member of Congress can legislatively address this issue somehow, or is this more of an issue that, as a member of Congress, through some sort of advocacy, you can begin to help improve those relations?
Yes, it's a concern, Matt, around the nation, and we've seen some issues that have played out in some very particular painful expression. The importance, it begins again with dialogue. I pride myself on having a good working relationship with every neighborhood of this congressional district, including those that are predominantly Black or Latino or Asian as newly entering into our community. And the dialogue that's established enables me to better understand from all perspectives about the hurt and the injustice. And you know, I think all the players are willing to do this. I talk to our police forces, who are a tremendous strength in this district. They obviously are in this mission to provide for safer communities. And certainly everyone deserves the right to a safer community. What you glean from those conversations, what you get from the dialogue that is open and steady and very informing, is the tool that you use for resource advocacy and public policy. And I think in general, just in general, we need stronger urban policy in this country. The millennials are telling us they're going to migrate to cities. They want that. They want sustainable communities, walkable communities where they live, work, and play in an urban culture. Well, government should be ahead of that curve. And government needs to look at the public safety elements. They need to look at the various elements that builds a better urban core. And by the way, it's smart growth to reinvest in our cities. So amongst that, obviously, is public safety and making certain that we're guided by the voices of the police community and the community neighborhood voice.
Thank you. Mr. Vitollo.
Well, first, I just want to go back and address the vetting policy of refugees coming in. According to our CIA, our FBI, that they say it is impossible to fully vet these people. So, and the other issue when it comes to those refugees as immigrants coming into this country, and believe me, my grandparents, they came over as immigrants and they were proud to be Americans. There are people who are coming over, and you yourself have been responsible in bringing 3,000 Syrian refugees, I believe it is, into the area. And we don't know, they haven't been able to be vetted properly. And the population here is paying for their health care, their housing, their living. We are schooling them. We are putting undue burdens on our schools. So as far as it being a great thing, it's not really that great of a thing. To get to the issue that you asked me about, I believe that our police community is probably amongst the best. This is a great area. We don't have a lot of the problems they're having in a lot of other areas, and that's because there is a discussion. There are some tough places, there are some bad actors all the way around. It doesn't matter. I have a great friend, Darnell, who says that, you know, he says, you know what I teach my kids? He said, I teach my kids, when the policeman tells you to step out of the car, you step out of the car. You don't take your phone, put it on Facebook or Facebook Live and stick it in the cop's face. And that's the kind of message that needs to be sent all the way around, whether it's black, Latino, or white for that matter. Listen, I was not a good kid when I was young. I got the peanuts kicked out of me by a cop, and I deserved it, really. Not that he should have, but it happens.
Thank you. Karen, and Mr. Vitollo will answer.
Okay, this is a foreign policy question. Since the beginning of the 21st century, the U.S. has intervened militarily in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. What would your criteria be in assessing when a situation in another country justifies a U.S. military intervention?
That's a great question. It's a great constitutional question. War is to be declared by Congress. And when we enter into a situation, whether it's Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, whatever, it needs to be declared by Congress, not some emotional. Do I agree? Did I agree that we should have gone into Iraq? No. I disagree. I disagree with going into Afghanistan. I disagree with going into a lot of these countries. Do I think we need to go after terrorists who have brought burdens on America? Absolutely. But the criteria for going in is when the American population, the nation of America, is under threat. When it is imperative for the safety of Americans, unless we agree as a Congress to help another nation, and the Congress then joins in that decision. I don't believe in a carte blanche given to a president.
The War Powers Act.
That's right.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
So,
Before you send my grandchildren and my son to war, the War Powers Act needs to be signed.
I agree.
Thank
The
you.
War Powers Act
Yep.
needs to be signed.
Please.
So with that, I believe, once again, that power does rely with the Congress, and constitutionally, see, again, that's what I said. I will get behind anyone. I will get involved with Republicans, Democrats, independents, libertarians, if they are solidly moving along the lines of constitutionalism. I'm with them.
Thank you. Mr. Tonko.
Certainly. Well, the question, Karen, was stated in a very broad context, and that's very important for this discussion, because since the turn of the century, we've had a long bit of commitment to these wars, and the longest in our history with Afghanistan. And I think it's important for us to understand that the taxpayers are exhausted, and critically so, our military is exhausted. So we need to do it smart, along with deliberate. When you asked about the conditions, I believe we need to make certain we have our allies with us. We can't go it alone. We can't be the cop for the world. So that's a fundamental principle that needs to be involved. But before that, resorting to diplomacy, coming to the table and making certain that we can talk out the issues before we have boots on the ground. And I would resist boots on the ground unless there was some very severe situation. And also, I think the AUMF out there, authorization to use military force, is very broad. Presidencies ago, we put stuff together that enabled the executive branch to have carte blanche, green light to invest in a way that was demanding much of our nation and our troops. So I believe that we need to make certain that we have a good balanced approach with our allies, and that's creating allies in the Mideast, making certain that the Kurdi forces and other governments are, where they are U.S. friendly, are part of our allied force. And again, I would go back to the refugee issue. We cannot afford to allow refugees to be that perfect storm where they are the recruitment bonanza for ISIS. We need to see that issue for what it is from all perspectives. People demoralized, people dehumanized by not so kind dictators, not so benign dictators, are then a perfect recruitment crew for
Mr.
ISIS.
Thank you. Our last question from the panel will be from Steve, and it will be answered first by Mr. Tonko.
Several of the recent answers and questions from both candidates have touched on the issues of immigration and refugees, so I would just like to ask kind of follow-on question. I think realistically, we have to admit that the population and economic activity in much of upstate New York is stagnant or declining, but could resettling refugees in these communities provide an economic boost?
Well, you know, the importance, I talked about engineers, about in the immigrant population, about medical types. We are one of the hottest hubs in the country, one of the top 5 in this country for innovation, green collar, high-tech job growth. If you're to go to Global Foundries and walk through the cafeteria space, which is immense, you'll see menus from around the world. That's how diverse that workforce is there. When we create situations where we have not been able to fill, according to 2011 statistics, 600,000 manufacturing jobs because of lack of skill sets, when that number is projected to grow to 2 million by 2025, we have to have a mix. We have to make certain we're reaching to STEM and encouraging our people to develop the skill sets and the intellect so that they can fill these jobs. But many of the sectors of our economy require that opportunity to have our immigrant population assume some of these jobs. That is our order of competitiveness, and then to grow their American dream here as our families before us did. So I think that we have to be real and focused on how we develop all this activity. And by the way, with us being one of the 5 hottest hubs of real estate in the country for that job growth,